Our guest this morning is a neuroscientist, a speaker, a yogi, a mom, and still she has time to write best-selling novels. Welcome to Breakfast Television, Lisa Genova.
Thank you.
So, like me, many of our viewers are probably familiar with you as being the author of Still Alice, which was made into a movie starring Julianne Moore, and it was about Alzheimer's. Why did you choose to tackle ALS in your new book, Every Note Played?
Well, it's actually related to Still Alice. So the man who co-wrote and co-directed that film, his name was Richard Glatzer. He was diagnosed with ALS just a couple of months before he read Still Alice. And so I got to know Richard very well and see him direct this movie, unable to speak because his ALS began in the motor neurons that feed the muscles of his neck and head, so he lost his voice right away. And his left arm was totally paralyzed. He directed that film typing with one finger on an iPad. So after we got through shooting, I asked him if I could write about ALS next in his honor, because this is what I do. I write stories about people living with neurological diseases and disorders.
As a neuroscientist, as an author, someone who's clearly done a lot of research, what else can you tell us about what it's like for someone to suffer from ALS?
Yeah, thank you. So I think, millions of us dumped buckets of ice water over our heads.
Right
and so
here?
Yes, me too. So when you hear ALS, we have, we're conscious of those letters, like, oh yeah, I know ALS, and we picture dumping ice buckets. But we don't typically picture what it feels like to live with that. So what is it? So it's a progressive neurodegenerative disease. It usually begins as a weakness, normally in hands and feet. 80% of the time it's there. So it's usually in your dominant hand, say, and I'm having trouble working the key in the lock, or I drop my tennis racket, or while I'm typing it just feels a little like weakness, or there's muscle spasms. It doesn't stay there. Eventually you become paralyzed there and it moves. So if it starts in my hand, I become paralyzed there and it moves up my shoulder, and then it keeps going. So eventually you can't walk, you can't use your arms, you can't feed yourself, you can't speak, and then eventually you can't breathe.
So you wrote about a man suffering from ALS in your book, Every Note Played. What themes came up while you were writing about ALS, and did any of them surprise you?
Yes. So I'm writing about ALS because I want the world to understand what this disease is and teach folks about that. But it can't feel like a medical manual. It can't feel like you're reading the Journal of Neuroscience.
It's kind of magical what you do, combining the two worlds.
Thank you so much. It has to be a great story. So in addition to ALS, like what's the human condition I'm writing about? So ALS is this disease that progressively paralyzes you, and that's terrifying, and eventually you can't speak, and the thought of not being able to reach you and communicate is horrifying. And yet how many of us are emotionally paralyzed in some way? So this story explores the ways that maybe we're stuck in the past or paralyzed in excuses, blame, regret, fear that don't allow us to live the life we really want to live. It also is about communication. So I don't have ALS. I can say anything I want. But do I tell the people I need to, I'm sorry, I forgive you, I love you? So in this story, I sort of explore those issues and the idea that even though we have this disease which has no cure, in what ways can the characters be healed?
I mentioned a moment ago how I feel like it's magical what you do, but it really is based on you have an incredible education to back up, your knowledge when you are writing these stories about various different diseases. But from as a neuroscientist and as an author, what's your process like? Because I'm sure it's very different from a regular author.
Yeah, well, it's such a responsibility, right? I have to get the facts right. So I'm telling the truth under these imagined circumstances. So I do a ton of research. So I read everything I can. Like, I've read medical textbooks on ALS, so like, you're all welcome. You don't have to do that. And then I shadow neurologists and nurses at the ALS clinic at Mass General Hospital in Boston. I talk to the world's thought leaders in research, and then I get to know people who have it really well. So I came to know 12 people who have ALS in the course of writing this book, and 8 of them actually died before I finished the final draft. This disease can be really fast.
There's the reality of it.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us on Breakfast Television. You've got a big day today. Lisa is speaking at the Dead Dogs downtown at the conference center, but you also have an opportunity to meet her. That's going to be happening at the Indigo Chapters Book Club on Granville Street tomorrow night at 7 o'clock. Thank you so much for joining us.